First and foremost, I'd like to thank all of you for attending today. It looks like we've got folks from all over the country, which is really exciting. Our last webinar on demystifying ARP ESSER, which is American Rescue Plan, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, was a huge success. We had a ton of attendees and a strong follow-up. It's so clear that folks in the tutoring industry, both for-profit and not-for-profit, are hungry for information on this topic. Today's discussion is preparing a winning bid, how to perfect your ARP ESSER proposal. I'll be the host, and Jack Reagan, who you see right with me, has graciously agreed to join me today as our expert. Jack is no doubt one of the most informed people on the planet when it comes to the American Rescue Plan. In so many ways, he's been a mentor to me on this subject. I invited Jack to participate because of his deep knowledge of the subject and his immediate experience with winning ARP grants. Jack, can you introduce yourself and speak a little bit about your experience and how it's germane to today's conversation?
Sure. Thanks, Nate. That's very, very kind introduction. I've been with UHY now for about 4 years. We're around the 30th largest accounting firm in the US, depending on the day and the metric, which we accountants can measure very well. And I'm based out of Loudoun County, Virginia, and doing work nationally on this. Been 33 years in doing government accounting and auditing, specialized in state and local government, higher ed, not-for-profit, and healthcare. And recently, as Nate alluded to, I've been engaged to help localities such as Wilmington, Delaware, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Chelsea, Massachusetts, and Anne Arundel County, Maryland, with the administration of their ARPA funds. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk with everybody today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack. Great to have you. And we decided that it would be most beneficial to divide today's discussion into 4 main subject areas, followed by questions from the audience, which will be taken via the chat feature. So we got Michael Jarvis on that end who's collecting questions from you. So you can either put those in chat or you can put those in the Q&A feature. And then we'll be collecting those and he'll be triaging those to me to ask Jack those questions at the end of our presentation. The 4 subject areas are as follows. A quick overview of ARP ESSER with acronyms, which will be posted in chat. How do I find an RFP that is a good fit for my company or organization? What are the elements of a strong proposal? And number 4, how can I prepare my company to succeed once I've been awarded the bid? During the webinar, I'm going to use quite a few acronyms. I know Jack will as well. I'd like to go over those really quickly so there's no confusion. I did this on the last one. I think it was helpful for folks. I also have our team post these definitions in the chat so they're at your fingertips for easy reference. The first one is ARP or ARPA, ARP or ARPA. This stands for American Rescue Plan or American Rescue Plan, respectfully. I will be referring to it as ARP or ARPA or ARP. The second one is ESSER or ESSER, which stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. The third one is SEA, sometimes just referred to as C, which stands for State Education Agency, most often the Department of Education. Fourth is LEA, which stands for Local Education Agency, most often a school district. Then there's RFQ, Request for Qualification, RFP, Request for Proposal, IFB, Invitation for Bid, and SOW, Scope of Work. Oftentimes, Jack and I will spell it out for you just to kind of intermingle like what these acronyms stand for so that we can kind of reinforce your understanding of what we're talking about in that context.
And
okay.
Nate, yep. Any truth to the rumor that your favorite cereal growing up was Alphabets?
It absolutely was. I think actually on our last webinar, we had a picture of alphabet soup as up on the screen when we went through this. So, yeah, it not unlike other industries, it tends to be the case that there are lots of acronyms that everyone is expected to just know what they mean.
That's it, by osmosis, right?
Yep, for sure. So for part 1, here's a quick overview. And I gave this overview on the last webinar, so I'm sorry for the redundancy, but I think a level set is always really important, especially for those who are joining us for the first time. The ARP ESSER enacted, which is ESSER 3, which I'm referring to, in March of 2021, was allocated $122 billion to states and school districts. Based on some estimates, there could be as much as $190 billion available for schools. The focus of the funding is to safely reopen and sustain the safe operation of schools and address the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's students. ARP Act also includes $3 billion for special education, $850 million for outlying areas, nearly $3 billion to support non-public schools, and we may refer to this as EANS, Emergency Assistant to Non-Public Schools, and additional funding for homeless children and youth, tribal educational agencies, Native Hawaiians, and Alaska Natives. There is a significant amount of money from this funding going towards learning loss. 20% of the funding that the local education agencies, the districts, receive is mandated to be used to address learning loss. There are multiple strategies being contemplated and explored, including summer programs, after-school programs, and most important to this webinar, tutoring programs specifically. I've seen numbers as high as $35 billion used as a calculation of how much will be spent from the ARP for tutoring across the country. The approaches used to support these programs must be evidence-based. Again, this is mandated by the American Rescue Plan. The interventions should respond to students' social, emotional, and academic needs and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underrepresented student subgroups. So Jack, first question. For context, can you give our audience a bit more background on why the government created the ESSER funds in the first place as part of ARPA and why this is such an important time in history for education?
Yeah, and everything that I'm seeing and hearing from the federal agencies, mostly Department of Education, but it's a recurring theme throughout the government, is that the pandemic laid bare a lot of the historical disparities in the underlying conditions that are present in a lot of our socially and economically disadvantaged communities. And as we are trying to recover from the pandemic, there is absolutely the goal to address some of these historical underfunding and underserving of these communities. And this funding is meant to begin. It's not an end point, but it's to begin to help to reduce these disparities that exist. And it's not just education, it's a theme across the government, but it's shining brightly in the education arena.
And can you talk just briefly about what might be alluded to or expected because of what worked and what failed in No Child Left Behind? I know that's a little bit of a loaded question, but I know that there's sort of this expectation that here's another chance we can get it right this time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the emphasis, and it feels like we measured a lot of things in No Child Left Behind, but I'm not sure that we necessarily measured the right things when it came to learning outcomes in No Child Left Behind. And what I find interesting about the ESSER 3 funding is not only do we have to demonstrate the accountability over the financial measures, but it's really allowing the users of this money to come up with some non-financial measures to demonstrate how well they're spending this money and how they're achieving those economic educational outcomes that are so critical. So there's this sea change in accountability from strictly financial to really trying to get some unique program ideas out there, measure them non-financially, and then use that measurement to reward those that are actually demonstrating efficacy in these programs. That's the big change. Awesome. No Child Left Behind. NCLB, you just stuff the money into the channel. Now we're going to really look at how well it's being spent and reward those where it's being well spent.
That's awesome. Yeah. Can you explain to our audience how the RFP process works and how our audience members should be thinking about going after these funds?
Sure. Keep in mind that as the government is spending this money, they want to be as transparent as they possibly can to allow anybody who's interested in winning these projects to win these projects. So they're trying to be very transparent. Their goal is to get the best quality good or service for the best possible price. So it is not purely a race to the bottom and the low cost bidder always wins. And it's not purely a contest of, well, here's the most qualified, but they're $10,000 or $10 million more expensive than their nearest competitor. There is this constant value judgment, this constant scale between best quality and best price. So you need to make sure you're demonstrating elements of both of those in your responses.
And who are typical candidates for grant versus vendor bid? And I know, we want to make sure that folks, you may want to explain the difference between a grant process versus a bid process. I know that at Pearl, we're working with, the state of Illinois through Illinois State University's Illinois Tutoring Initiative. And that is a state-based program where it's a state agency that's receiving the funding, and we're the technical infrastructure for that program. But obviously, we're seeing a lot of money pour into the districts, and then those districts have the autonomy to sort of decide how they want to implement. Can you talk a bit about that and those differences?
Sure. And it really, it starts with the nature of the funding. If it's federal money, or if it's state money that is coming in, there are certain things that the user of that money, and just because it flows down, it doesn't lose its character. So it may have gone from the federal government to the SEA, to an LEA, to a nonprofit, to another nonprofit. It still retains its federal character through all that. And because of that, you have to do these competitions, and make sure that you're doing the best possible price for the best quality of the product. Generally speaking, though, as well on that, you'll have grant agreements with nonprofits, and oftentimes I see the for-profit entities are treated more like vendors. There are some arcane differences between those two that we can address in a subsequent follow-up on this, but for the most part, the nonprofits are subrecipients and the grantees are vendors. Or excuse me, the for-profits are vendors.
So, I get a lot of questions as I talk to tutoring companies and academic support organizations around the country about preparedness. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But, there are lots of folks in discussions that I've had since our last webinar that are tutoring companies out there scaling their tutoring force to go after district bids. How important when writing a proposal is like that source, that proof of resources to fulfill? And I ask that question because in some cases, we're really getting into a little bit of unprecedented territory where you have entire states that were rolling out programs. And when you're looking for sort of like, how do we know that you can do this? If it's really not been done at this scale before, how do these folks think about sort of representing themselves and those types of opportunities?
So, to me, and I know we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the elements of the response and where the government's placing their emphasis for this type of service on the tutoring, they're going to want to see names of people. And they're going to want to see resumes of people to demonstrate qualifications. So the broader and the deeper bench that you can demonstrate that you have access to, that's going to be a critical success factor in differentiating your bid from a competitor's bid. It is, awesome. I see this area is going to be a shootout on who can bring the most qualified and the most number of qualified people to bear on the contract.
Great. Yeah. In our last webinar, I took a moment to give everyone a sense of readiness. And to be clear, there's some time, although the states are being and the districts are being very aggressive, as that there are cliffs for this ESSER money. This money has to be spent or has to be in contract to be spent by a certain amount of time and has a short lifespan in the grand scheme of things, right? But in regards to positioning, if you meet the following 3 criteria, you're pretty much in a good place to get rolling and start to look at these contracts. Do you have over 25 tutors on your roster? Are you leveraging trusted evidence-based processes for training tutors, maintaining quality and reporting. And you have experience with government funding and reporting specifically in regards to those kinds of contracts, or strong interest in learning the ropes. And so I bring that ropes part up because all that being said, we are working with a number of tutoring companies today that are laying the groundwork for proposing bids. These companies are doing a lot of the same kinds of things. They're recruiting highly qualified instructors, preferably with a background in tutoring, both in person and online. They have clear evidence-based approach for implementation. And we hope that they are pointing to our friends at Annenberg, the Annenberg Institute at Brown, which is where the National Student Support Accelerator is housed. This is really one of the most comprehensive, if not the most comprehensive body of research around tutoring and the benefits of that relationship-based learning. And it's not unusual to see Annenberg Institute mentioned in the RFPs directly as a gold standard for what is expected in regards to the way things should be designed out programmatically, and also the kinds of reporting that are necessary to prove efficacy. And lastly, a clear understanding of workflows to optimize for fulfillment, and a technical partner to ensure the appropriate digital experiences, logistics, support, and data collection and reporting. This is hard work. This is grind work, to really manage, sometimes in some cases, hundreds or thousands of instructors. Not all the contracts are that big, but they all have logistic issues, and it's important to have the right infrastructure to be able to handle those logistics. All right, let's move on to section 2 of our webinar. How do I find the right RFP or bid opportunity for my tutoring company organization? So this is really about how do I get access to the opportunity in the first place? Jack, I spoke a bit on our last webinar about some options to finding RFPs. I actually learned from you about GovWin and some of those others. Can you give some background on how you find RFPs and give our audience some insights into what tools you find most useful today?
Sure. So I think they fall really into 3 categories. One, if there is a specific school district or school districts that you want to target for this, you certainly have the ability to go out onto their procurement or their purchasing website and register as a vendor. You'll set up a profile that will indicate your interest in educational offerings, and you will get an email blast from those guys, from those districts where you register, that gives you when opportunities are published, when an RFP or an RFQ or an IFB is published. But if you're in a state like Virginia, where you've got 50, 60, 70 counties, that can be time consuming to register at all of those. So there are websites that are out there for a nominal fee, and run anywhere between a couple of $100 to a couple of $1,000 a year, that will source those RFPs for you. You register with that website, you set up a vendor profile, and you will get email blasts from those. There are differences in some of these. So there are some of them like Periscope and Public Purchase and BidNet Direct that are really procurement systems for the governments that use them, and they guide them through the whole procurement to payment process. They're great for the customers that they've got, but they don't necessarily source a broader number of people. One like GovWin that we mentioned earlier, they just register themselves as a vendor across all these governments, and they get all the RFPs that come in, they index them, and then based on a user profile that I set up, I get an email blast every day of RFPs that have been issued that meet my profile. As you go up that specialty scale, the cost definitely does increase though.
Awesome. Can you talk about the timing of RFP or IFP release? What I mean here is, we're obviously seeing some states declare big statewide programs, at the state level. And sometimes these are all happening at the district level. How do you think about this and how it will ultimately play out across the country? I know some states seem a bit more confused about how to implement than others. And then you've got some really fast movers in states that just being really progressive to actually try to meet the timelines that are being set by the RFPs.
Yeah, for the school districts, I see them following for this service offering kind of 3 waves of timing that follow the natural cadence of the operating cycle. So they're going to want tutoring programs set up for the beginning of the semesters. So if you're backing up from the beginning of the semester, I would expect to see a bunch of RFPs in April or May for school years that are starting in August and September. That gives you time to prepare it and gives them time to evaluate it and to contract for it. Similarly, you may see some, if they're only doing it on a semester to semester basis, you may see some RFPs in September, bid in October, evaluated in November, contracted in December to start in January. And then you've got a separate wave for summer schools as well. So you may see that in January, February, evaluate in March and April, contract in May for delivery in June and July. I think that's going to be the cadence of the RFPs.
Got it. We're also kind of starting to get some early indicators that although these states are being aggressive and putting these RFPs out, they're putting very strict timelines around receiving those proposals, that over the next year, we're going to see some folks succeed in implementation and some folks fail in implementation. And we're probably going to see some people putting bids back out as folks learn what's going to work and what's not going to work. So it's good. I just think it's going to be a really interesting time in our history in regards to education.
Yep, I agree.
Is it better for a tutoring company or organization to only propose within their home state, or can they look across the U.S. for opportunities, do you think?
I mean, I think that's up to you. There used to be a strong need and preference for local,
in-person
types of services, in person.
Yeah.
But one thing that the pandemic has proven out, and this webinar is a case in point. I mean, we've probably got people from 15 different states on this.
Yeah.
So the technology allows us to deliver these services more widely. You may strategically only want to focus on one or two states to start with, but there is nothing preventing you. And I think the buyers are a lot more willing to look beyond traditional geographic boundaries for things. They're going to want to see the skills and the competencies. Geez, where have we heard that before in education, right? Skills and competencies.
Right. And it really is interesting because although there is an emphasis on this, the efficacy of in-person tutoring versus virtual tutoring, there is also a lot of interesting research around what it means to have the right tutor, and how important that relationship is. And, again, pointing to, Susanna Loeb and Carly Robinson's, work at Annenberg and some of the neat things that we're seeing coming out of their research around these kinds of insights. So I'm really excited to just sort of see what this looks like, this new hybrid world of tutoring, and how much benefit we can get from getting students really connected with who is the best instructor, whether that's online or in person. So on to section 3, the real meat of our talk. How do we write a great proposal as part of a tutoring bid? And we're going to focus in kind of at the district level too, because I think that's a lot of who's on our call. You outlined for me a while back in one of our sessions, Jack, that most proposals are broken down into the following components. You have the overview of the firm of company proposing. So who are you? Tell the story of what your tutoring company is and what you stand for. Overview of the people from the firm. So these are the people that are part of fulfillment. These are the administrators, that sort of thing, but also the tutors. The SOW, which is the scope of work, or how the request will be fulfilled based on the requirements outlined in the RFP or IFB. And then typically you'll be asked for some references. And then obviously incredibly important is the pricing. So Jack, can you speak a bit about how RFPs can differ and how important it is to follow the sequence outlined in the request?
Yeah, where I tend to look, because as Nate, as you said, I think those 5 categories you just stated in some manner, shape, or form are what are in all RFPs. But what becomes more important to the government and the school district is reflected in the scoring model that they're using to evaluate the bids. So towards the middle or the back of the proposal, there'll be something in there about evaluation criteria or scoring criteria, something like that. Look at that, and that will tell you, and you'll be able to see, maybe they put 10% on the firm and 50% on people and 20% on statement of work. you will see what the government, what the school district thinks is most important, and you want to tailor your approach to the proposal to reflect, okay, this is the most important thing. I want to make sure I hit it the hardest. So I would go there as you're looking at writing the proposal to make sure you've got that nailed down.
So a follow-on question to that is, how much autonomy does the bid creator, the RFP creator, have to craft for needs specific to their students, as opposed to form fitting based on ARP ESSER requirements or something like that? You understand the question there? Like,
yeah,
I'm really just, because I know from district to district, there's different levels of needs. I mean, you have certain rural districts that have real issues with early literacy and that sort of thing. So I'm curious to your answer to that question.
So, and again, you're going to want to make sure you address what is in the statement of work. So you may have some great ideas that, based on your reading and doing research on the school district and understanding a little bit about the issues that they're following, you may think that you've got a great approach. Make sure that you write to exactly what the school district has asked you to write to. Get that addressed in the core part of the proposal. But if you've got a great idea that you want them to consider, say, and by the way, here is an alternative way of doing it that you might find efficient and effective, that I'm going to stick in the appendix to my bid. Make sure, though, that you write to what they're exactly asking for. Otherwise, you may be considered, quote, non-responsive, and they're going to throw the entire thing out.
That's really important. Yeah. So if you do want to go a bit off script, you should still answer the specific question as concisely as possible, and then refer to going off script in some type of appendix.
Yep. And not only that, you want to follow exactly the order that they tell you to respond in. It may not make sense to you, but the reviewer, they're going to have probably 3 to 5 people who are on the selection committee that are going to score all of these responses. They're going to have a checklist. That checklist is going to follow exactly what they put in the request for proposal or the invitation for bid, and it's going to be sequenced exactly the way they told you to respond. So they're going to be checking all of these boxes to make sure that content, and then they'll have a commentary column off to the side, and then they'll have a scoring column out to the side as well. Do not make them hunt for the data. You want to follow it exactly, no matter how counterintuitive it may be to you. It's the way they're going to evaluate the bids. I can't emphasize that enough. You've got to follow. Do not make them hunt for it, because if you make them hunt for it, again, they may think you're non-responsive and throw out your bid and just not even evaluate you.
Yeah, and so this is a really good lesson for our folks on the webinar today. You know, I think our tendency is, particularly if we've won a contract, you know, is to say, hey, I think I've got a winner here in a proposal. And the idea is like, oh, I should just basically send this in. It's like sending 100 resumes out and hoping that it's going to resonate with one person. But the tact really should be customizing each one of these. Now, the more you do, the more boilerplate and pieces of that proposal that you'll have, and you'll be able to use that to compile. But to Jack's point, it's so critical that you answer their direct questions directly, and then you put it in the order that they ask those questions in the RFP.
And the other thing to keep in mind, Nate, as well, and this may sound picky, but you know, if the bid they say is due on December 15th at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time,
yep,
that means it's due on or before 2 o'clock. If it comes in at 2:01, even if it's not your fault, you know, FedEx or UPS or somebody didn't have it arrive on time, too bad, so sad. You are non-responsive, and they will not even open your bid. So you need, and like this time of year, if you've got bids that are going in, you have to account for weather, shipping delays. I lost one. This is crazy, but I lost one because a government wanted an electronic copy and a hard copy by 2 o'clock on a certain day. I sent the electronic copy in, and it was due on a Monday. And I sent the electronic copy in on Friday when I shipped the document out, The document didn't get there shipping wise till 4 o'clock. They're like, too bad, we needed both of them in by 2 o'clock. We're not even evaluating your bid.
Unbelievable. That's crazy.
So it sounds crazy, but
yeah,
again,
but I mean, you have
don't
important
want
nuances.
to be accused of preferencing a vendor who
Yep.
submitted their bid late over somebody that didn't submit their bid late.
Yeah, understood. So, okay, let's get into some of the common sections of an RFP and the nuances how to respond in those sections. There will be typically, there'll be a section in the RFP that discreetly outlines the minimum requirements of the proposal. Most typically, you'll see a letter of interest allowing you to give an overview of your company. Jack, how would you think about best positioning on this first piece of information, this sort of doorway into what you plan to do?
That's your win themes. What is it that aligns your strengths with what they're asking for in your proposal? So in your cover letter or your transmittal letter, your letter of interest, you want to give them, this is the reason why you need to hire me. And that's also where you can lay the groundwork, where if you've got something that's innovative or different from what they're asking for that you want them to consider, you can bring that up and put that in the letter of transmittal and refer them to the appendix to the proposal as well. So just in tying some things together, that would be the way I would do the cover letter. You have to hit hard. What are your win themes? Why should they pick you?
And there's almost always a section referred to as qualifications and comparable experience. And in this section, you typically need to refer to some of your current clients. These are references that can be contacted by the evaluators and an overview of relevant experience with similar work, which may be at the state, district, or even the national level. Jack, how should our folks be thinking about any gaps they may have with references and experience? If they're missing district experience, for instance, does that automatically disqualify them in some cases, or are there still opportunities there?
So in that case, Nate, you really need to take advantage of the question period in the proposal or in the RFP process. So let's say the RFP gets issued on the first day of the month. They may ask you if you have any questions to submit those questions by the 12th of the month. Then they provide the answer to your question to everybody. They don't just provide it to you, they provide it to everybody by the 18th. So in this case, what you do is, let's say that they're looking for middle school experience and you've only got elementary school. You can say, you know what, can we substitute X number of years of elementary school experience for middle school experience that you've asked for? They say yes, then you can use that experience. They say no, then you need to evaluate whether or not you stand a really good chance of winning the proposal. If that is, that type of experience is rated as 40 points out of 100 or 50 points out of 100, that may tell you, what, you're not going to score that well in that area. It's not worth my time to write the proposal.
Right. And you talked about this concept of a bid or no bid rubric, which is a really good thing for our folks to understand. What you don't want to do is spend hours and hours and hours and cycle through going after something where you could take, half an hour and read through it and find one gotcha. Gosh, this really disqualifies me. I think I can do some work to get there, but right now I'm not going to be a good candidate because this is something that's required.
Yeah, but strategically using that question period can get you. And the the districts want to get qualified vendors in. And if you can state a case as to why they're being too restrictive on qualifications and should open it up to some alternatives, state your case. The worst thing they're going to say is no, and then you bid and you move on to the next opportunity.
Yep. The next section is usually biographies of the folks that will be fulfilling. And this could include program administrators, coordinators, and in some cases, the RFPs may want to see specific tutor resumes. In some case, they ask for all of them. Jack, do you have some insight into how this might work, specifically for large programs where a company is supplying 100, 200,000 tutors? I'm assuming that the opportunity here is to highlight the top tutors, or aggregate the experience, but they're asking specifically for what they want, right? And we want to make sure we specifically give them an answer.
Yep. And that's where you'll need to carefully read the RFP and find out what they want you to provide. If they are, looking for bench strength, and it's unclear whether they want 100 or 200 resumes because that's how many people they want to see.
Right.
Ask the question. Say, do you want to see all these, or are some representative resumes acceptable? So that's another area where if it's unclear how much they want you to provide, ask the question so that you're not making an assumption that, oh, well, they can't possibly want 200, so I'm just going to give them 10. And then they knock you out because you didn't give them 200 and they say you were non-responsive.
Right. And I would also expect that, for instance, if the RFP is out there and, this is a specifically third grade literacy, RFP, then, the tutors that are represented, whether that's in some kind of aggregate narrative or as absolute discrete separate resumes or bios, need to be folks that are clearly certified or ready to be able to fulfill in that subject area specifically.
Yeah, and I want, as silly as this sounds, I want you to give some thought on the people side to, aligning your people as you submit them to what the district wants from the qualifications. And literally your most qualified person, stack them first, and then go from there. Just because you're the owner of the company, don't put your resume first automatically. Yeah. If you're not going to be the main one that's delivering it, put your resume farther down, hit them right between the eyes with the people that are going to deliver it, that are your most qualified, that's going to help close the sale by having that highly qualified team.
Awesome. Now, there'd be a couple of formal requirements to show that you're a licensed business, and if required to be licensed in the state in question, you may have some paperwork there as well. The next typical section will request your proposed plan. Sometimes this is referred to as an SOW, or scope of work. This should describe the services to be provided and the manner in which your tutors intend to identify and meet the learning needs of all students, and communicate student progress and tutoring frequency to parents and the Board of Ed or relative oversight body. Jack, how should tutoring companies be thinking about positioning themselves here, and how might they stand out from the competition? They're asking for, to some extent in the proposal, that we would like for the program design to look like this. And so you don't want to go too off script in what they're proposing would be the best situation for their particular district or state. But you also want to be able to have something that's at least allows you to stand out here as how you plan to fulfill.
Go back to that scoring model. Make sure your proposal reflects what they're telling you is important. Make sure that the response is in line with what they're asking. If you've got great ideas on other things, refer out to an appendix for those other ideas. And to stand out from the other firm, to me, pick that area that's got the highest scoring and show how you've got that the best. That's where they're putting their emphasis. That's where you need to put your emphasis, and that's where you need to be the most competitive.
Awesome, exactly. And as part of this section, the RFP will usually outline very clearly what is expected as part of the proposer's plan. And examples might include the nuances of scheduling, setting specific benchmarks for learners. It will obviously include providing students with individualized or small group tutoring in whatever subjects are critical to that entity. Student learning assessments will be mentioned. Providing students with all resources and materials needed to be successful in the tutoring program, including adapting individualized or small group tutoring to meet the learning needs of the students, monitoring student progress, informing parents of their child's progress, and providing the right data back to the Department of Education, BOE, or district office. As mentioned before, there definitely be some variation in how RFPs or invitations for bids can be formatted. Are there any other details, Jack, or nuances you'd like to explain to our audience here on this particular subject before we move on to the next section?
I just re-emphasize, follow exactly what they want. So in the framework that Nate just laid out, if they say that they want to adapt individualized or small group tutoring to meet the learning needs of all students, you may want to have a little section that is bolded out, address that. Or here's, if something is important is monitoring student progress, and have a section that says this is the way we want to do it. Don't make it hard for them to find how you are addressing what they want. That's the best advice I can give. Follow what they're telling you exactly.
Awesome. In our last section, which is section 4, we're going to talk a bit about the process of being awarded. So this is the good part, right? Jack, can you explain?
Or no,
yeah,
oh,
it's
gosh,
a little bit of like,
won.
yes, get really celebrate and then realize that you got a lot of work to do. But Jack, can you explain to our audience what the decision-making process typically looks like from the perspective of the RFP committee? I know there'll be a committee, and that could be an invitation for bid committee or an RFP committee.
Yep. So, I mentioned at, let's say a proposal was due on the 15th at 2 o'clock. They'll open the bids at like 2:05. And that way they will list out, here are all of the proposals that we are going to review. They will then provide the copies of those to the selection committee. Again, they may have 3, they may have 10. It all just depends. They will evaluate those bids against the criteria. They're going to do that checklist approach that we talked about. They may ask for a meeting with, we call it down select. So let's say there were 10 respondents. They may meet with the people they've evaluated as the top 3 for further discussions. That can occur anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months after the initial submission was made. The other thing that they may choose to do is to ask you to submit a best and final offer. So you've submitted a price and they're like, yeah, we really like you. Can you sharpen your pencils up a bit and give us what your absolute rock bottom price is for doing this? You don't have to change your bid cost at all if you don't want to. I normally will do a little nominal change, but I will build that into my initial cost submission on the off chance that they come back and ask for a best and final.
Got it. And once awarded the project, so you won now, maybe you've gotten narrowed down to 3 and you've been awarded, you're the one who won. And I know that in some cases, we have a couple of partners that are licensing our platform who are sharing a project. So they, for instance, in Gwinnett County, I think they awarded to dozens of tutoring companies to make sure that they had enough to support down there near Atlanta. Once awarded the project, what typically comes next?
So once they make an award, there's usually a 10 to 14 day period after that where any of the losing bidders are allowed to protest. If it's protested, then it can be a delay in the start of the project. If it's not protested, after the end of that protest period, it will generally go to the legislative body, depending on the size of the contract, for their approval formally of the contract. And then they'll send you the contract, you countersign it, and the project can get started. From the notice of award to when the project starts can be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks if it's not protested, and it can be a heck of a lot longer if it's protested.
Got it. And we'll probably do an entire webinar at some point about data and reporting and compliance for these types of contracts. But in a few words, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of reporting, what the integrity of the data, what we mean by when we talk about empirical or data with integrity, and what it will mean to stay on top of the education reporting pieces, as well as the financial elements of reporting.
Yeah, I think this is going to be, Nate, a real differentiating factor among organizations in this space. If you can effectively and efficiently provide not only the financial data on the spending, that's going on, that's on your contract, but all of these non-financial data on the student learning outcomes. And the more granular, the better, because they're going to want to use that data to evaluate the efficacy of the program. And if you can give them more data to analyze, that's a plus in your column. Or if you can give them more timely. So, let's say that you can turn around monthly data within 3 days of month end or 2 days of month end. That's going to be better than someone that's going to take 30 days after month end to provide that non-financial data. And then finally, any assurance that you can give them that there is some integrity to the data, whether you're getting, a geek like me to do some sort of third-party assurance on both the financial and non-financial data that comes, the better off you are on that, and that can be a differentiating factor as well.
That's awesome. And so before we move to next questions, I want to thank all of you for attending. These are extraordinary times. The tutoring industry is exploding. We've been doing regular analysis of the industry growth. And, we have some measurements that are showing the industry growing from being worth about 18 billion in our country to, with this infusion of capital coming from the American Rescue Plan, moving it up into that $40 billion range. So the opportunity to have a tutoring company and to build a tutoring company today is better than it has ever been. We have an opportunity to truly change education through one-on-one and small group learning. And I know it's been intimidating and it continues to be intimidating. Consider participating in government funding. But I promise you, if you are armed with the right information and the willingness to go step by step, everyone that wants to make a difference has the opportunity to do so. So let's move on to a little bit of Q&A. So I got a couple of questions for you, Jack. The first one actually we've had multiple people ask this question. I know that we've brought these names up, and to be clear, we're going to put this in some of the notes that we'll send out with the recording of this particular webinar. But can you clarify the names of the procurement websites listed, or the aggregators of RFPs? I think, I know you mentioned GovWin, but if you could just rattle those off one more time for our folks, that'd be great.
Yeah, so GovWin is the one that I use. They're purely a web crawler where they go out onto all these procurement sites, they get the RFPs, they index them, and then based on search criteria and my user profile, I get an email blast at the end of every day. They're probably the priciest. They've got a pricing model that is based on the size of your company in terms of revenue. So smaller ones are better. You should get a better price on it. But there's Periscope is another one that I've seen. Public Purchase is another one where you can register. BidNet Direct is another one that I've seen out there, and their pricing models are a couple of $100 a year for those. But those are only as good as the people who are in their service that they're servicing. But those are probably the 4 biggest ones that I'm aware of.
Great. We also have a nice relationship with RFP School Watch, which is another one that's more specifically around education. There are a bunch of these. You have to kind of weigh the price and the budget that it's worth it for you to get access to those opportunities. So the second question comes from Aquarius. And Aquarius asks, are nonprofits more likely to receive federal state funding over for-profits?
I might have answered that question as yes 2 or 3 years ago. I don't think so anymore. I think I'm seeing a whole lot more of the grant funding going to for-profit entities, as well as the regular path to the nonprofits. So no, I don't think there's a bias one way or the other.
Awesome. And I'm sorry, I don't think that we covered this. I know we covered it in the last webinar, but can you talk a little bit about the timeframes? And this comes from Kit. What is the timeframe or cliff for this money to be spent? I know we've got ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. We got money sloshing up from the CARES Act. we have the potential in the future of some kind of extension. But let's talk about those hard dates for now, because I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah. So, and forgive me, I think they extended some CARES Act today. I haven't had a chance to check.
Yeah, it's pretty fluid. I'm hearing some rumors as well.
So I think that came out today, but generally the ARPA money, where, whether it's ESSER related or just general ARPA money, the money is in the door. Half the money came in 2021 in May. The other half is coming in 2022. It has to be contracted to be spent by the end of 2024, and it has to be spent by the end of 2026. So I call this 5-year money. So you get it in 2021, you've got until the end of 2026 to spend it.
Awesome. So we have one participant, Garika, who actually, I think she's out of San Francisco, but she has a really neat company. I met with her recently, where she's got a bunch of instructors who are teaching coding. So this is sort of one of those more extracurricular kinds of things. It might not be kind of core subject-based stuff. Will there be intermittent sort of opportunities for those more extracurricular kinds of experiences, or do you think that that's just going to kind of be held to the side until like the core stuff is taken care of?
Oh, I think they're going to be looking for anything and everything. And
awesome.
One of the things that I would encourage you to do, if you've got those sort of ideas, realize that if you're in already for the regular core, that if they decide to extend to do extracurriculars through that type of platform, the first place they're going to go is to the vendor that's providing the core and say, can you do this? So it's all the more important to try and get your foot in the door to be that selected vendor for the core to do extracurricular, or if the bid is for extracurricular, that can provide a pathway to the core as well, because they're not going to want to go through this whole procurement process again. Why not just amend the old contract for this other service that's closely related, and we'll give the vendor this other work as well.
Yeah, so that actually leads me to a slightly different question, which is, I know we have at Pearl, we have some wonderful tutoring companies that license from us that are very specifically focused on special needs. I'm thinking specifically of companies that have an army of Orton Gillingham certified instructors focused on dyslexia. Do you think in that same case, you're going to start seeing some specific RFPs around special ed, or do you think that you're going to more see special ed kind of mixed into the overall proposal for a large program?
Nate, I think there's going to be a little bit of both. It wouldn't surprise me to see a little bit more in specific dealing with those children with extraordinary needs because of the equity lens that all of this funding is going through. So it makes it really easy for the school district to demonstrate that they're fulfilling their equity goals by having a proposal that's very specific to address that segment of the population versus having that buried in another, overall bigger project. And, oh, I want this too. Having that laser focus. So I think we're going to see more of those rather than less of those. Because of the equity lens.
Awesome. So this has been so great. And I know we'll have more questions come through, and I know we've got other things that are coming through the pipe here. And as questions come in, we'll collect those questions and make sure we get those answered for everyone. I know that Mike he just posted my link there. I'd like to thank first and foremost, Jack Reagan for not only participating in this webinar, but also, as I said before, really being a mentor for me in this very complex and very new subject. We'll be doing more and more webinars and bringing on some amazing guest expert speakers, probably bring Jack back to talk about reporting and compliance. And also we plan to make notes, videos, and transcripts related to today's webinar available to all of you. If you're already planning to participate as a subrecipient or vendor and are looking for a technical partner, an all-in-one platform to implement your program, please schedule a time to chat with me via the link posted in the chat. This link will also be sent out to everyone via email following the webinar. We hope to get all of this out to you hopefully by tomorrow, so that if you've got colleagues or tutors or anyone else that wants to kind of watch the webinar and get access to the information, and we want to make all of that available to you. But we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And for those of you that I will not see or talk to before the holiday, I hope you have a wonderful holiday and end of the year. Thanks again, Jack. This has been awesome.
No sweat. Glad to help.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.